weekend full of horrible images coming out of Gaza. We're also seeing now the release of more and more footage, it seems like, from the October 7th massacre. I guess presumably as a way to counteract the enormous pressure that, or I should say protest, that has been building across the globe in hopes of halting Israel's bombing of Gaza, at least as a first order issue. We're well over 10,000 now civilian casualties. Matt Binder managed to find an interview in Hebrew that apparently was translated, where a IDF, I guess, commander suggested that there were another 10,000 Hamas fighters killed, or presumably Hamas fighters killed. Unclear exactly, but nevertheless.
I mean, the 10,000 we already understood was very likely an undercount, because they're counting the numbers of bodies that they can find, the amount of rubble that we're seeing, and the amount of people stuck under rubble. That's going to be just a slower roll of figuring out how many are dead.
Israeli forces have now surrounded Gaza City. Unclear, how they're going to go about, I guess, entering into what is left of Gaza City. But here is images of massive protests. We don't have a count, but the idea was that there was going to be a march, I guess, from Freedom Square to the White House. And there was so many people that showed up, they couldn't march because it was literally backed up. And I don't know what that distance is, but just an enormous showing for, calling on Israel to at the least stop killing civilians. Let's show these images.
You can see there, if we just keep that, that may be it, that long white line there. I'm not sure if that's the exact long piece of paper, but it looks like it. There was one in D.C. with 8,000 children's names on it, printed out one by one in fairly small font, and it stretched for quite a while. The children's, or actually, sorry, not the children. The 8,000 has to be, the civilians so far that have been released. The names of the dead. That's what was printed there.
Wide number of constituencies who were there in support of, against the, or in support of a ceasefire, but also in support of Palestinian sovereignty and human rights. On and on.
There's big ones in Berlin too, which is notable because Berlin I saw somebody get arrested for waving a Palestinian flag early on in the protests, and now they have giant ones going down the street like that.
Here is an interview with Marione Ingram, author, demonstrating in support of Palestinian rights. She is 87 years old. A survivor of the Holocaust, and she's discussing why she's been sitting out in front of the White House on a daily basis, calling for the Biden administration to use some leverage.
Marione Ingram. I'm the author of The Hands of War, which talks about the Holocaust, which is a memoir about my experience as a Holocaust survivor, a survivor of the worst bombing in the in the Second World War in Europe, and the worst firestorm ever, all done by the Brits and the Americans, was called the Operation Gomorrah. I'm a civil rights activist. I'm a pacifist, activist for peace, and I'm here to ask our government and others to stop Israel from killing people in Gaza, from allowing Gazans to be free the way, give them the same rights, elemental rights that Israelis experience. This is my wish. I'm here. My husband and I have been here this week every day. We were here last week protesting with Jewish Voices for Peace. Big demonstrations. We'll be here tomorrow. I'm 87 years old. In 2 weeks I'll be 88, and I'm still doing this for decades now, and I don't think that never again is only until it is again. We keep doing the same thing over and over and over. And what really upsets me is that of all the people in the world, Jews should be the ones setting an example for peace.
And there are a lot of Jewish people setting that example.
Yes. In fact, all of the 3 big demonstrations.
This is, these protests came in the wake of Netanyahu basically saying, no, we reject any humanitarian pause in his country's assault on Gaza, saying they would relent only after Hamas frees all of its hostages. In other words, not some type of trade. It's also been reported that Blinken's basically said, if you pause, it'll give you more time, ultimately, to continue this assault. It has also been reported in the Washington Post that Hamas indicated that it would release all civilian hostages in exchange for a 5-day pause. That, according to diplomats familiar with discussions that are being held occasionally in Qatar, where some Hamas leaders are based. So that's the situation. The Biden administration supposedly is getting frustrated with Israel refusing to have a humanitarian pause, which is wonderful for them, but also sort of like shocking. Aren't you aware that you are pushing through $14 billion of aid? That may give you a little bit more leverage.
Well, I mean, on the other hand, it helps Biden with the age question because I didn't realize he was born yesterday.
There you are. It really is more of a question of like, who do they think is born yesterday? I mean, the idea that like, you've got to use leverage in this instance. Saw well, we'll get into this later, but I saw just a clip of a biography that was being done. When I first heard the name Netanyahu, it was as a 9-year-old or 10-year-old, and it was Yonatan Netanyahu, or Yoni Netanyahu, who was the leader of the raid on Entebbe when the PLO had hijacked a plane and flown to Uganda. And this was the type of sort of like, real life thriller. And the one person killed, or at least was the leader. I think there were a couple of hostages that were killed, but was the leader of this raid, this Israeli raid who was Netanyahu's brother. And apparently a biographer was writing about Netanyahu's brother, but interviewed Bibi. And back
Just
then,
sent that,
even,
Bradley.
in
Yeah.
1980, there's a clip from, is this the...
I believe this is what you're talking about. We might have seen the same thing. This is an excerpt from the biography.
Yes.
In the 70s.
So I'll read it from it. It's the historian Max Hastings interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu extensively after the Netanyahu family had recruited him to create the official biography of Yoni Netanyahu. This is a portion from that. At Bibi Netanyahu's dinner table in Jerusalem, I listened with crawling dismay to Bibi talking about the future of his country. In the next war, if we do it right, we'll have a chance to get all the Arabs out, he said. We can clear out the West Bank, sort out Jerusalem. He joked about the Golani Brigade, the Israeli infantry force in which so many men were North African or Yemenite Jews. They're okay as long as they're led by white officers, he grinned. I mean, the guy is... Ilan Pappy made a point that, like, if anybody was to do a biography on Bibi Netanyahu, the page, the inclusion of ideology would be a page long. That he's mostly interested in power, but I do think that, like, you can't dismiss the fact that there's an enormous amount of racism associated with this.
David Remnick said something similar back in the 2000s too. Like, I had meetings with Bibi and Netanyahu in the 80s, and like, I've never heard somebody so racist.
I mean, you can also see it within the Netanyahu's government treatment of Ethiopian Jews. I mean, this, like, there will be a new word kind of coined for this version of extreme, like, racist supremacy that Israel is engaging in, and that is how you have to view the dehumanization of the Palestinians through that lens.
In a moment, we're going to interview Robert P. Jones, president and founder of the Public Religion Research Institute, author of The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and the Path to a Shared American Future. And I think none of this has to do directly with what's going on right now in Gaza, but the idea of a white supremacy that first sort of finds its roots in the way that it deals with indigenous people, I think will have, some resonance for what we've been talking about.